All right, folks, HBO is taking lots of heat for a new project it has in the works. The network has greenlit a show by Game of Thrones creators Dan Weiss and David Benioff called Confederate. Based on the premise that the South successfully seceded from the Union during the Civil War era and blacks remained enslaved to the present day. And the blowback has been swift and strong. A number of people immediately commented when this was announced. And then they even trotted out two African Americans who are serving as producers on the show to defend it. Husband and wife team. Now, April Ryan, who launched the successful Oscar So White social media campaign, and four other black women organized a hashtag No Confederate social media protest during Sunday night's episode of Game of Thrones. The hashtag temporarily trended #1 on Twitter in the U.S. and hit #2 on Twitter's worldwide trending topics. Now, in response to the backlash, HBO issued this statement, quote, "We have great respect for the dialogue and concern being expressed around Confederate. We have faith that writers Nichelle, Dan, David, and Malcolm will approach the subject with care and sensitivity. The project is currently in its infancy, so we hope that people will reserve judgment until there is something to see." Joining us right now is April Ryan, again, co-creator of hashtag No Confederate. So, April, what about that? Why you haven't seen a show? All we know is the name of the show and the concept. Why not allow the show to move forward to see exactly what it looks like?
Well, actually, we know more than that, right? What we know is that Benioff and Weiss are the producers of the fan favorite Game of Thrones. That show is now in its 7th season. They have been constantly and consistently criticized, not only for the gratuitous depiction of rape on the show, but also with respect to the lack of significant characters on the show, and with respect to the lack of diversity behind the camera. And those are the things that I talk about with Oscar So White. So if they can't handle those two issues, race and the subjugation of women, in over 6 years, what confidence should we have in either of them to be able to handle those issues with increased nuance and sensitivity on a show that will have the enslavement of black people, and clearly we'll be talking about those issues on that show.
But they also say they have two African Americans who will be prominent, playing prominent roles on the show.
They did say that. What they also said, though, in the press release is that they brought in Malcolm and Nichelle Spellman, who are incredible writers in their own right, because they were lazy, talking about Benioff and Weiss. So it wasn't as if they understood that there were going to be issues that they needed to handle sensitively, and therefore they brought in the Spellman so that they could do so with nuance. It was that they, Benioff and Weiss, were lazy. So if HBO really wants to do a show on slavery, and I'm not exactly sure why, because we've got more than enough slavery on books and movies and TV already, they could pick up Underground, which was recently canceled by WGN. We have Misha Green, who is a black woman, fantastic producer and showrunner. She could do that show. It already has a devoted fan base, and we would 100% support that. In addition, because we know that Benioff and Weiss have an amazing amount of leverage with respect to HBO, why don't they take a step back and let the Spellmans come through with a pitch or an idea for a show, and then we could open up the opportunities for more marginalized communities, which is what Oscar So White is all about.
Tiffany.
I'm just really excited that you plugged and said that they should support Underground, because that fan base is devoted, and we're still trying to find a location and a space for that. But let me ask you this question. When the show finally comes to TV and it finally is released and folks are watching it.
Assuming that it does.
Assuming that it does, of course. What then is the next steps for folks online, or how we should hold these folks accountable for this issue? What do you think those next steps are for the folks who are using the hashtag last night?
Right. Well, remember that Confederate, assuming it does see the light of air, it won't even start production for another year. Right. And so that's why we're hitting it now and telling HBO, don't spend any more time, energy, money, or resources. You know, better spend your time and money to do something something else. Assuming that a year from now, or maybe even 2, the show does come to air, then we'll have conversations about whether people want to keep their HBO subscription if this type of subjugation of black people, the violence against black people, continue. Right now, HBO is doing a great job with respect to Insecure. There's another black woman who has a project coming out. Her name is Nettie. And they've also committed to doing the August Wilson cycle of plays, which is going to be helmed by Denzel. And that's 9 more after Fences, right? So this isn't an issue with all of HBO at this time, but who knows what comes in the future.
And Avis, historically, when you look at what HBO has done in terms of various projects, whether it's documentaries and others, they have gotten significant applause from African Americans, and in fact, they have a huge African American base.
Absolutely, and it's especially disappointing that it's almost like a betrayal to see an investment in something that is so inflammatory and so offensive and just so uncaring. But I'm wondering, April, do you think that this is connected to our larger political context? Because it seems right now that we're seeing so many things sort of flare up that glorify and romanticize, quite frankly, racism in America, and spun as entertainment.
I think that's exactly right. So they want to build this as alternate history. But what is alternate when we have Dylan Roof, a white nationalist, a Confederate flag waver, who walks very calmly into a church and kills 9 black people in Charleston, South Carolina? When we have textbooks in the state of Texas that are being rewritten, so it's no longer enslavement of African people. Now it's, oh, they were just servants, as if they were able to leave at any time. You know, it's very interesting that Benioff and Weiss said that they've had this idea on their minds for years, but it wasn't until Trump became president that they felt comfortable bringing it through. Clearly they had the leverage 2 years ago during the Obama administration. So what's the difference now? Because we're seeing an increase in violence and hateful rhetoric against black and brown people in this country, I don't see where the alternate history comes from when this country still has not dealt with what the Confederacy and what enslavement has meant to African and African American people.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we certainly will see what happens next with HBO if they move forward. April, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't no cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
News One Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.